getting rid of these extra windows. So windows open, it goes a little haywire here. All right, here we go. I think we're on the recording now. We're live. Let me just do this. This will make it 10 times easier if I do. Yeah. Okay, we got a weird here. Oh, here we go. Record to the clouds. All right. Shalom, everyone. Welcome. We're the Awakened by Yahuwah Assembly, Yahuwah Almighty, Yahushua Messiah. Here today with my brother Joshua, my sister Marissa, our sister Shoshana, and our sister Sally. And we are going to be doing a Shabuot study, pretty similar to the one that we did last year. If you guys are, listeners for a couple. Hello, everyone. Welcome. We're the Awakened by Yahuwah Assembly, Yahuwah Almighty, Yahushua Messiah. Here today with my brother Joshua, my sister Marissa, all right, guys, our sister Shoshana, and our sister. Okay, yeah. All right. So sorry for the background noise there. Just trying to get that thing to pause. So we're going to be going into, let's see here, our Shabuot study from last year. And again, I just want to reiterate, like I did last year when we did this study, I do not promote 119 Ministries. I am using their transcript as a template for this study. I'm not affiliated with them. Just want to make that clear. I know some people get confused and think we're promoting another ministry. I'm not. Okay. Okay, so I'm using their transcript. It was free to use. It helped me prepare for this type of study. It kind of gave me a little bit of a cheat sheet here. Let's see here. All right. I don't know why I did that. I'm noticing there's like weird things going on with my keyboard lately. All right, here we go. The Moedim Shah. Really? We're going to be dealing with that today, guys, outside? Really? No? Really? What is... Bro. Come on, keyboard. Stop being stupid, man. I don't have time for this today. Like, come on. All right, the Moedim Shabuot. In the scriptures, Yahuwah gave his people special days to remember and celebrate every year. In Hebrew, these set-apart days or feasts are called... And I would actually correct their pronunciation here. I would say Muadim. So let me just fix that. Okay, which means appointed times. The purpose of these days to remember what Yahuwah has done in the past and anticipate the fulfillment of his promises. So basically, his covenant promises is what's being referred to here, and also fulfillment of prophecy. You can even say all of his appointed times have something to do with end times prophecy. Okay, how Paul says, brothers, you are not ignorant of the times and seasons. Okay, all right, so anyway, moving on. All right, so Yahuwah's scriptural calendar brings rhythm and intentionality to our lives, uniting us around significant events and truths they reveal about Yahuwah. In this teaching, we are going to talk about one particular muad, or appointed time, that is the Feast of Shabuot. Okay. In the English, the Feast of Weeks. You might have heard of a festival called Penecost. That's the Greek name for this festival, which, by the way, Greek for Penecost means like 50. So, the 50-day count. All right, so Shabuot means weeks, hence Feast of Weeks. This word is plural form of Shabuah, week, or I guess Shabuah would actually be the right way to pronounce that. Yeah, Shabuah, week. You might notice that this word is part of the traditional Hebrew greetings said at the end of the Sabbath, which would be Shabuah Tov or Shabuah Tub, okay, which means tube week. Okay. The name Shabuot comes from one of the main instructions. connected to this festival. Again, why do I click on something once and it multiplies? It's weird. Okay. From one of the main instructions connected to this festival, Yahuwah said to count 7 weeks from first fruits offering within the week of unleavened bread to the day of Shabuot. And again, this is key, guys, because I see the tradition about the Omer count. Where is that in Scripture to count an Omer? There's no, the word Omer is nowhere in the Hebrew, Greek, Aramaic, any version of the Torah that you can find. The word Omer is never there. So I don't know that. I'm guessing, theorizing, it must have been some rabbinical tradition at one point. Anyway, so let's get into the first cross reference we have here, which is Leviticus 23:15-16, and it says, "And number to you after the first feast day of Pascha." That's the Targum there. That's Targum Pseudo Jonathan there. Which, by the way, the first feast day contextually of the week would be the first day of unleavened bread, by the way. So it's telling you to start your count after the first day of unleavened bread. So it'd be the day after the first day of unleavened bread. Okay, so after the first feast day of Pascha, from the day when you brought the sheaf for the elevation, 7 weeks complete they shall be. Until the day after the 7th week, you shall number 50 days. You shall offer a minka, which, by the way, is like a grain offering in Aramaic, a minka of new bread unto the name of Yahuwah. And then continues on in verse 17 of Leviticus 23. From the place of your dwellings, you are to bring the bread for the elevation, 2 cakes of 2/10 of flour, which must be baked with leaven as first fruits unto the name of Yahuwah. I do find it interesting, again, the differences here, possibly a spiritual meaning here would be you're getting rid of the old false leaven that you had to get rid of, at Passover time, right? A couple months later, now you're being commanded to actually put new leaven into the dough, right? And how Yahushua talks about around Passover time, he would tell us to get rid of that old leaven and to become a new lump. So now this new lump is actually being created at Penecost here with correct leaven, correct teaching and doctrine. So I just find that interesting. That could be a possible spiritual meaning of this feast. Leviticus 23:15, and count to you after the festival day. So again, this other Targum gives you the same idea, that's after the festival day, which in context would be first day of unleavened bread. From the day that you brought the Omer of the elevation, 7 weeks complete they shall be. I think all of us would agree the Omer's being given on the 15th, or the day of first fruits. So I'm pretty sure everyone can agree that's the Sabbath in context is talking about. So when it says the tomorrow after the Sabbath, it's not talking about the weekly Sabbath. Okay. Anyway. So let's see here. Going now to Deuteronomy 16, verse 16. 3 times in the year, all your males are to appear before Yahuwah your Alua in the place that he will choose at the Feast of Unleavened Bread, at the Feast of Weeks, and at the Feast of Tabernacles. They shall not appear before Yahuwah empty. Now, I know there's a lot of brothers and sisters out there. I know you're already thinking it. Well, we are a place where his spirit dwells. You can't spiritualize this. This is talking about the tabernacle. This is talking about the temple in Jerusalem. You can't spiritualize that. You can't say, oh, well, we're a type of dwelling place for his spirit. No, you can't. To me, that's very dangerous to be doing that. Very dangerous. Anyway, the whole point, if you read the whole commandments of Shabuot, Penecost, they would have to bake the loaves in their own homes, bring it from their own homes to the temple. So there's no way to spiritualize that. You're bringing it somewhere out of your house. I mean, that to me, that's very clear. So anyway, but moving on. So from the first fruits offered at the time of Passover and unleavened bread, we count 7 weeks, 7 Shabuot, to the feast of Shabuot. Okay. So far, I don't see anything wrong. And obviously, I edited their document a little bit, which occurs on the 50th day of this count. That's where the name Penecost comes from. It means 50th. Okay. Deuteronomy 16, verse 9 from the Targum Onkelos here. 7 weeks numbered to you from the beginning of the harvest, when the omer of elevation is reaped with the sickle, you shall begin to number the 7. I think this is where people get confused, because they say when you put the sickle to the grain, right? You're not counting the sickle to the grain. You're not counting the grain. He's telling you to number literally 50 days from when you did that action, if that makes any sense. That's what he's saying. He's not saying go ahead, count the sickle. So I just want to make that clear. That's not what Yahuwah is saying, okay? He's saying to count literally 50 days from when you put the sickle to the grain, okay? Verse 10, and you shall perform the festival of weeks before Yahuwah your Elohim with a tribute of freewill offering of your hand, which you shall give as Yahuwah your Elohim will have Baruch you. Exodus 34:22, you shall celebrate the Feast of Weeks, that is the first fruits of the wheat harvest, and the Feast of Ingathering at the turn of the year. By the way, turn of the year, if you look at the Septuagint, would be middle of the year. So in that context, I mean, turn is middle of the year. So it's not talking about Pentecost as a turn of the year. I know this gets confusing because we don't realize he's talking about 2 different feasts in one verse. Okay, he's talking about the wheat harvest, which is Pentecost, and then he's talking about Sukkot, which is also called the Feast of Ingathering. So just wanted to kind of clear that up in Exodus 34, verse 22, what it actually means there. So again, the meaning of Shabuot. Change that there. All right. Just like unleavened bread and Sukkot, Shabuot is a harvest festival and pilgrimage festival. Shabuot celebrates the wheat harvest in ancient Yashar'al.
Doug, did you mention okay, I'm sorry. You talked about the ending of the middle of the year, right?
Yeah. I just explained to the audience that the middle of the year is not referring to Pentecost. The middle of the year is referring to the Feast of Ingathering, which is a separate feast, Sukkot. So Sukkot would be the middle of the year, which we're actually, we still got a couple of months until that feast comes. So let me see here. So it talks about the wheat harvest in ancient Yashar'al, but like the other 2, it's much more than a celebration of the harvest. Shabuot is a memorial, which pretty much you could say all the Muadim or memorials of Yahuwah's saving acts in history and on behalf of his people, specifically related to the events surrounding Yashar'al's journey out of Egypt to the Promised Land. After the command to celebrate Shabuot is reiterated in Deuteronomy, Yahuwah says, you shall remember that you were a slave in Egypt. You shall be careful to observe these statutes. So just like Passover and unleavened bread, Shabuot is a memorial of the events surrounding Yashar'al's deliverance from slavery in Egypt. Yahuwah's Muadim are divided into 2 seasons, the spring festivals and the harvest. The spring festivals and the fall festivals. Shabuot marks the end of the spring festivals. It's connected to Passover by the way of counting of the weeks and is regarded as the climax or completion of the Passover season. Yeah, makes sense. Speaking of Yahusha and the new covenant, Shabuot is given even greater significance. Oh my goodness, what is going on here, man? I must need to put new batteries in this Logitech keyboard because it's tweaking right now. Is given even greater significance as the book of Acts records. Yahusha visited his disciples prior to his ascension and promised that the set-apart spirit, aka the Ruach, let me see how you pronounce this, Ruach Ku Hadash, the set apart spirit would soon empower them in remarkable new way. They would be his witnesses to Jerusalem, Judea and Samaria, and even to the ends of the earth. Shortly after Yahushua's ascension, when the disciples were all gathered together, Yahuwah suddenly poured out his spirit upon them, and they were given tongues of fire. As we read in the second chapter of Acts, the glad tidings message was then preached in many different languages. I would like to highlight and underline languages, already invented languages that we use here on
Hey,
earth.
Doug, I have a question. What does tongues of fire mean?
Tongues of fire is the idea, well, traditionally, can't really prove this, but traditionally the tongues of fire, according to according to other literature, tongues of fire refers to the language of angels. Now, what I find interesting too is that even in other traditions, they have the idea that obviously that when Yahuwah divided the languages at the Tower of Babel, he had his messengers help him out with dividing or not help him, but he gave them a job to divide all these different languages. So what I wanted to kind of touch on, I'm glad you brought this up, is that tongues of fire don't mean some secret mystical language no one knew. Okay. Malachim speak languages that the Hebrew, like even if you want to go on a singular language that the Malachim would spoke, it's very obvious they came and spoke to these Hebrew prophets, and the prophets understood them. It wasn't like a brand new language that they never understood. So to me personally, I'm not trying to go on a whole nother tangent, but the language of heaven has nothing to do with the Babel of the Pentecostal church. It has nothing to do with that. The language of heaven, in my opinion, was what we call today the Paleo-Hebrew language, or whatever was the original Hebrew language that Yahuwah gave to Adam and Kua and their descendants. That's Yahuwah's heavenly language. It's not anything. It's not a language that no one ever knew. It wasn't a brand new language that no one ever knew. What the purpose of tongues was to give them utterance to be able to speak to Gentiles in their languages, to be able to speak to other nations in their languages. When you read Acts 2, that's the context of tongues. It's that literally the Ruach gave them utterance to speak in those other nations' languages. And they were, there's all type of interesting traditions about exactly what happened that day on the outpouring, whether all 70 languages were given utterance to them by the Ruach or, what have it. But go ahead, Brother Joshua. I see you got your hand up.
Just in my opinion, Yahuwah's language and the language of Shemayim would have to be ancient Hebrew, because he gave his name in Hebrew or Abari.
Yeah, I agree. So just as my theory goes, I mean, you got multiple options as far as the exact original Hebrew. You got, pictograph, or, some people want to say pictograph is just hieroglyphics. So that's why usually the Paleo is favorable over the pictograph, because, supposedly that's not really a fully, vocalized language or whatever, so that's usually why the Paleo is like more favored as the original language of heaven.
I think they would sound the same. It's just what we're looking at as far as letters. Just because something's written different doesn't mean it has a different pronunciation.
Yeah, true. That's what Shabuot is all about. It's a time to remember. It's and celebrate the fact that we've been delivered, taken to be Yahuwah's people, and empowered to reach the nations with the glad tidings. It's a day that the apostles continue to observe. Acts 2:1, chapter 20, verse 16, and 1 Corinthians 16:8. We trust that believers everywhere see the value of this scriptural festival, and make it a part of their lives. Speaking of which, what are some ways we can celebrate this festival day? How to celebrate Shabuot. So now we're going to get into how it's to be celebrated. Okay, so, and I'm going to make note of these cross-references too. We are going to get back to going into these cross-references from Acts and 1 Corinthians. later on. I just want to write these down real quick so that I don't forget. Just do that real quick. So 1 Corinthians 16:8, then you got Acts chapter 2:1. Okay, so let's move along here. Scriptures tell us to count 50 days. And this is where I disagree. I would actually say scriptures tell us to count 50 days from the day after the first fruits offering, not the first fruits offering. So this is where tradition comes into play with certain people, because we're under the assumption we're counting on the day of first fruits. You're not counting on the day of first fruits. If first fruits is the 15th, it makes no sense. It says the day after the Sabbath. If first fruits is a Sabbath, it doesn't matter what version you read, by the way. Like, it says right the day after the Sabbath. So if first fruits is the high Sabbath that it's talking about, you can't do it on the Sabbath. So it's actually saying to count 50 days. I would say the day after first fruits is actually what it's saying in that verse, which again is 16th of Abib. Okay. So just a little minor adjustment I had to do from their commentary there. Okay. So the day after the first fruits offering, within the week of unleavened bread to the day of Shabuot, Leviticus 23:15-16, we already read that. Deuteronomy 16, verse 9, we already read that. Okay, that's how we calculate the day of the festival. The first fruits of the ripe barley was tied together in a bundle and brought to the priest at the temple to be weighed before Yahuwah in ancient times, beginning with first fruits offering after Sabbath. And again, this is why it's important that when you're doing whatever calendar you're following, needs to coincide with that too. If you start Passover too early, you're not going to have ripe barley. By the way, that's the problem too with calendars out there where you're starting it way too early when winter's not even over yet. But anyway, so it says first fruits offering after the Sabbath within unleavened bread, and an omer of barley was brought to Jerusalem temple and weighed before Yahuwah. And I do just want to make a mention. I know other people have different ways of calculating. I know other people think it's the weekly Sabbath just talking about due to the confusion about that. So what I would really recommend is those out there that are watching this study, really test your versions of Leviticus 23 there, because when you look into older versions like the Septuagint and the Targums, they make it very clear what the Sabbath is talking about. It's not talking about the weekly Sabbath, the regular weekly Sabbath. So just FYI. So if you actually test your versions out, you'll see that the Masoretic is the only one that generally doesn't really make it specific, and just says Sabbath and doesn't tell you which Sabbath it's talking about. So anyway, with unleavened bread. Okay, so the Sabbath within unleavened bread, and omer of barley was brought to Jerusalem temple and weighed before Yahuwah on each of the 49 days of the count. That seems to be more of I wonder if that's more of a tradition. The idea that the barley was weighed each day of the 49 days. And probably that's where they get the whole counting the omer nonsense, because there's no scripture that says they're waving the barley each day of the 50-day count. There's no scripture that says to do that. So I would even take away, I understand they wanted to include some historical things, but this kind of, I don't know, it's kind of like, it's not really important, because most likely it was a traditional thing. Yahuwah never said for them to do it. So I would actually take that out of the document. That's not really important. An omer is a unit of dry measure. So I'm not talking about what an omer is. And I would even get rid of counting the omer, because again, that's just a tradition. An omer is a unit of dry measure equal to 1/10 of the ephah, half of a gallon dry measure. There is exactly some debate about when the first fruits offering, and thus the start of the count to Shabuot, should be performed. Okay, which is true. Some say the count should start from the weekly Sabbath, and I just talked about this. So this is kind of just reiterating what I'm talking about here. There is some ambiguity in the text. Even the Pharisees and Sadducees have debated this issue in the first century. So it's interesting. They give you some commentary there to research for yourself. Go ahead, Sister Marissa. I see your hands up. Go ahead.
So, Doug, are you saying that there is no mention whatsoever about the word Omer in the scriptures?
Yeah. Well, what I mean, sis, is there's no mention of the Omer ever to be counted. Not that the Omer is not mentioned at all as a unit of measuring. Obviously, it is. But in this context, it's never mentioned as a command to count it. It's never, Yahuwah never says, go ahead and count the Omer. Or that you're supposed to wave the Omer at the temple each and every day of the 50-day count. He never actually says that. That's pretty much from what it seems like it was a tradition that they added to the feast. I guess historically they felt like they needed to. They thought it was a nice idea to wave. So I'm glad you asked me that question, because just want to clarify, yes, you can find the word Omer in the Bible, but never in this context, never in the context of counting the 50 days. It's never mentioned to use the Omer for counting 50 days. From what I've seen, even on Facebook, most people traditionally rendered the counting to the 50th day of Pentecost as counting the Omer, but again, scripture doesn't say that. So again, that's just a tradition. But anyway, so hopefully I clarified myself there. Now the first fruits ritual pertains to specifically to the land, and it depends on a working priesthood. Yeah, 100% agree. And tabernacle or temple in Jerusalem. And since that it's not available today, we can't observe many aspects of the ritual the way it is written in the Torah. We can't do wave offering. Again, this is where I disagree. I don't know where they're getting the idea you're doing a wave offering every day of the 50 days. I don't get what they're talking about there. So again, this is why I wanted to make an announcement before I start using this guy's transcript. Just want you guys to know I don't promote their ministry. Don't believe everything they teach. So again, I just wanted to omit that from the document, because there's no evidence that whoever commanded them to wave a wave offering every day of the 50-day count. He never said that. He said to do a wave offering on the day of first fruits. That's the wave offering. He never said do that every single day of the 50-day count. Just want to make that clarified. Okay, so I'm just trying to not have any traditions added in here. Just trying to let the text say what it says. Okay, many of the aspects of the ritual, the way, however, just with the other festivals in the Torah, we can honor the memory of these rituals as we look forward to the time when the temple and priesthood are restored. As for the actual day of Shabuot, the Torah says we are to treat this day as a type of Sabbath, a day when no ordinary work is to be done. Leviticus 23:21. So they actually give scripture for this bullet point here. Okay. Which I would agree with them. You treat this day as a type of Sabbath. It's talking about you shall do no ordinary work. So on Shabuot, we enjoy Yahuwah's baraka of rest. Also, the Torah commands us to rejoice with our families and others on this day. Deuteronomy 16, verse 11. And you shall rejoice before Yahuwah your Elohim, you and your son and your daughter, and your manservant, your maidservant, and the Levite, and the stranger, and the orphan, and the widow which dwells among you. In whatsoever place Yahuwah your Elohim shall choose, that his name be called there. Okay, so that's self-explanatory. That's where they're getting the idea we are commanded to rejoice. Many will get together at their local congregation or someone's home and worship and celebrate together for all Elohim has done for us in the light of this commandment. Also, many people will make it a point to give to the poor during Shabuot. This is based on the Torah commandment to leave the edges of your field unharvested for the poor. Now, I personally don't do this because, to be honest, we have to be in the land to do this command. If you read even the commentary they're talking about here, it says in your land, your vineyard, your vineyard. Okay, this is not a command that you can honestly really keep in captivity. You don't see Daniel keeping this in captivity. Okay, I don't know what their beliefs wholly are on this, or whether they try to spiritualize it, but to me, it's kind of, I just want to put it out there, and the reason why I don't try to do this when I'm in captivity, because honestly, and if we look at the context of the verse they're pulling from, it's talking about the poor among you. It's not saying random unbelieving poor people in general. So anyway, go ahead, brother Joshua.
No, you touched on.
Yeah. Yeah. So, Leviticus 23:22, and when you reap the harvest of your land, you shall not reap your field right up to its edge, nor shall you gather the gleanings after your harvest. You shall leave. Notice how it says your harvest. Okay. You shall leave them for the poor and for the stranger or sojourner, and Yehu your Elohim. If I'm not mistaken, verse 22 in Leviticus 23, literally the word for sojourner might actually be proselyte, possibly. I would have to look into that, but it's more specific than just a passerby. That's all I'm trying to say. So, go ahead, Sister Marissa. I see you got your hand up. Go ahead.
Okay, so this is where I get a little confused because, people always say, well, if you're going to keep, if everything in the Bible you're supposed to keep, then how can you say we can't do this because we're not in the land? So when you mentioned about,
they're given.
No, wait. So when you mentioned about the fact that it says to give to the poor, that could apply to us differently, right? I mean, just because we don't have a field.
Not really, because he's talking about giving food, not money. He's not talking about giving money or helping a poor person out. He's saying to not take the edges off of your field off, to leave gleanings of your grapes, food for the poor. So, I mean, you can spiritualize it if you want. That's up to an individual person. If you want, you feel led by the Father to give to the poor. I'm not saying don't, but understand that whenever Yahuwah commanded us about the poor, it was the poor of our own people. It was never of the Gentiles. We were never obligated to give to the poor of the Gentiles. That's one of the things.
Yeah, but then how do we reach the people? I mean, how do we reach the lost if we're only taking care?
Hold on, because we're getting off topic here. Witnessing. This is a feast. The point of his feast is not even to be with the world for this time period. This is to be with his people. Number one, festival times were never to go to the world. You can look that up all through the Torah. It has nothing to do with the world. This feast is about being with your brothers and sisters, point blank. So when he's talking about giving to the poor, you got to take that all into context. He's not talking about the poor of a non-believer or the poor of another nation. He's talking about his own people. You can read like Deuteronomy, where clearly, I think it's either Deuteronomy or Leviticus, where he talks about Leviticus 25, if I'm not mistaken, talks about who is the poor among you, your brother. It's not talking about every poor person. And I can witness to a poor person without giving money out of my pocket. That's not a reason. If you feel led to give to a poor person, that's fine. What I'm trying to say, it's not according to Yahuwah's own verbal words. That's in his word. He does not say we are obligated to give to a poor person. Generally speaking, that's of the world. That we're not responsible for taking care of the world. We're responsible for taking care of our brothers and sisters. If you feel led to give, that's fine. Just realize that's not obligation. That's you feel led to do it. So that's fine. That's optional. What I'm trying to say is that's optional. But to try to apply this spiritually is incorrect, is what I'm trying to say. It's incorrect.
No, that's why I said I was confused. That's why I asked the question.
Well, no, I understand. I'm just trying to explain to you why I think that's an error, because clearly the text itself, I understand it's confusing, but you got to understand Yahuwah has parameters around his law. He has a way he wants us to keep his laws. And it's very clear to me in the whole context of scripture, when we are in a situation, not permanent, but temporary situation where we can't do things because things are not in place, we need to hold off, and it's not sin. So I just want to explain that, because I know it's not just you, but a lot of people are having this problem because, again, part of the problem is the Christian church is trying to put false guilt on you and try to say, well, if you're not keeping everything, you're sinning. No. First of all, Daniel wasn't able to keep everything. I always go back to this point. Daniel was not able to make sacrifices ever in Babylon. He was not able to fully keep the feast ever in Babylon. He was still considered a righteous man before Yahuwah. He was not considered a lawless person. So I just want to reiterate this and bring it home. I'm going to get to you, Brother Joshua. I see you're patiently waiting with your hand up there. But I just want to say, guys, don't let anyone from the Christian church get you into some false guilt because they don't fully understand the scriptures. No offense. They don't fully understand the scriptures, and they don't understand that Yahuwah has parameters around certain laws, that there has to be certain priesthoods in place to do certain laws. Go ahead, Brother Joshua.
So the word in the Greek is proselytos in that Leviticus verse, which doesn't seem to line up with the Masoretic word at all. The Masoretic word is ger, which is, I think, almost the same word as goyim or Gentile.
Yeah.
Very different context in the Masoretic versus the Septuagint.
Yeah. I would take the Septuagint over this. It makes perfect sense to your point, bro. Okay, he's talking about Israel, right? He's talking about his people when he's giving the feast. He doesn't give the feast to the Gentiles, okay? He's not going to give a feast. First of all, let me explain something. If they have not accepted Messiah yet, they're not part of the Commonwealth of Israel. There's no point for them to be keeping the feast.
At the same time, this specific command doesn't seem, even though it's in this verse, this is just regarding their fields. So regardless of wherever they're at in the feasts, there's still going to be strangers in the land that can be going through their fields, picking up fallen grain. So I can see Gentiles and foreign people coming and picking up grain too. Obviously, they're not going to be keeping the feast out in the field. They're going to be in their houses.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. Yeah, so to me, it's very hard to keep this commandment. Also, I wanted to add, most of us don't own a vineyard. Who is talking about food, leaving food over that you're growing in your own vineyard? So
yeah, that's what I was trying to say. What Brother Jacob was just Yeshua was talking about regarding the poor.
Yeah,
I wasn't looking at it in a context of, it just says, regarding the feast. I was just talking about it in general, and that's what I thought as well.
Yeah, I get it. That I get the whole giving the poor in general, but what I'm trying to say is Yahuwah never commands us to give to the poor. If you look at all Torah in context, he never verbatimly says give to the poor unbeliever. He never actually says that. He says, yeah, leave your gleanings for the poor. But when you look at the majority of the time he's saying that, he's talking about that there won't be any poor person among you. Among you means part of Israel. Among you does not mean a non-believer. That's what I'm trying to say, is that as a whole, scripture speaking, he doesn't ever command, even when it says do not hold your hand from the poor, he's talking about your poor brother in context. So he never actually, and I'm not saying it's wrong for you to give to a poor unbeliever, but what I'm trying to say is it's not an actual verbal commandment from the Father. From what I've seen in scripture, it's not an actual verbal commandment from the Father. And my personal opinion, I agree with the Septuagint in this version. It actually agrees with the whole counsel of the whole Bible, especially in the Tanakh, and that Our responsibility is not to feed the poor of the nations, it's to feed the poor of our own people. That's just my opinion on it. It's very clear that the majority of the time, Yahuwah is like your brother, your sister. He's never even talking about the stranger.
Technically, this verse doesn't even have to do with. It's not even about giving to the poor, because he's not commanding anyone to go and gather up these things and give to the poor. This is just leaving it behind. So this isn't even about giving to the poor. It's just let it drop and leave it. Like you don't need it.
Yeah, that's true. To not fully gather it so that there's leftovers.
But it does mention the poor.
But it doesn't mention giving it, sis. You're missing the context. It's saying leaving food in your own vineyard. You can't spiritualize that. It's talking about leaving grapes in your own vineyard, leaving crops in your own field. You can't turn that into money. You can't turn that into, and he's not saying you are commanded to give it to them. It's saying to leave it behind so that if there's a poor person walking by, they could pick a grape, pick a strawberry, or pick whatever is in your vineyard, in your field. That's completely different to what today we do with actually actively giving money to the poor. That's what I'm trying to say. Even if you generalize that verse is not talking about that you're obligated to give to the poor of anyone. So that verse is talking about the feast, number one. Number two, it's talking about leaving stuff in your field. If you're not a farmer, this doesn't apply to you. If you're not farming, we can't. What I'm trying to say is this in a general, whether we want to, generalize this or not, or it's explicit to the feast, regardless, it's a farming commandment. If you don't have your own field, you don't have your own vineyard, there's no way to keep this commandment, is what I'm trying to say. That's what I'm trying to say. It's an agricultural commandment. It's talking about leaving the edges of your field unharvested. That's what the literal command says. That's what I'm trying to say. So that's literally what the verse says. So we can't spiritualize that. Anyway, moving on. Verse 22 of Leviticus 23. When you reap the harvest of your land, you shall not reap your field to its edge, nor shall you gather the gleanings of your harvest. You shall leave them for the poor and the sojourner. I am Yahuwah your Elohim. Other cross references, 2 Chronicles 8 verse 13, and did so according to the daily rule, offering them according to the commandment of Masha for the Sabbaths, the new moons, and the 3 annual feasts. The Feast of Unleavened Bread, the Feast of Weeks, and the Feast of Booths. Okay. 1 Corinthians 16, verse 8. But I will remain in Ephesus until Pentecost. Okay, so again, we have an interesting. And again, I want to reiterate. I don't know if Numbers 11 happened on Pentecost. I want to make that known. I have no idea whether this happened on Pentecost. Even Jewish leaders themselves, most rabbis themselves, will admit that they don't know whether this outpouring happened on Pentecost or whether the Torah was given at Pentecost. It's a Jewish historical tradition. So I just want to make that known. That's why I'm not teaching that this literally happened on Pentecost, because I have no idea whether it did or didn't. But I thought it was an interesting spiritual parallel to Shabuot here is Numbers 11:25, because we know that in the New Covenant, it did happen on Shabuot, the outpouring. So I just thought this would be a cool parallel here. It says, and Yahuwah came down in a cloud and spoke to him and took of the spirit that was upon him and put it on the 70 men that were elders. And when the spirit rested upon them, they prophesied and ceased. Okay, so this is talking about, a type of an outpouring here. And I have a couple other cross references here for how the outpouring was very prophetic and something to happen later on. So Acts 11:15 says, and as I began to speak, the set apart fell upon them, just as he did upon us at the beginning. So possibly Acts 11:15 could be referring to Acts chapter 2, and possibly even their ancestors when Yahuwah did it in the book of Numbers, possibly. I know I'm stretching a little bit on that, but it could be. Joel 2:28-32, it will come about after this that I will pour out my spirit on all mankind, and your sons and daughters will prophesy, your old men will dream dreams, your young men will see visions, even on the male and female servants. I will pour out my spirit in those days. I will display wonders in the sky and on the earth, blood and fire and columns of smoke. So this is Joel 2:28-32, which is like basically talking about a future prophecy. What the actual full fulfillment still has yet to be fulfilled, what was partially fulfilled in Acts chapter 2. And that hasn't happened yet. Even so, I will pour out my spirit in those days, and I will display wonders in the sky and on the earth, blood, fire, and columns of smoke. Acts 2:1-4, when the day of Pentecost came, they were all together in one place, and suddenly there came from heaven a noise like a violent rushing wind, and it filled the whole house where they were sitting, and there appeared to them tongues of fire, distributing themselves, and they rested on each one of them. Okay, so, and again, the word house is there. I'm interested to look into what the Greek word for house is, because the common I believe is a misconception is they think that this happened in an upper room or something. I actually think differently, in my opinion. I actually think the house it's talking about is Yahuwah's house. I actually think they would have been in the temple since they're keeping the festival here, personally. Let's see here. It says here, where does it talk about the house? What verse is this? Begin to speak with more tongues. Here we go. G3624 oikos. Inhabited house, building. The house of Elohim is one of the definitions of this Greek word, G3624. The house of Elohim, the tabernacle. So it is one of the definitions. Personally, I think that's what happened. Go ahead, Brother Joshua.
I don't think they would have been in the temple yet, not considering, especially if they were worshiping Yahusha. If they were all together, if there was as many of them gathered together, all worshiping Yahusha, I don't think they would have been doing it in the temple. Not with the Pharisees and the Sadducees there.
Yeah, that's possible. That is a good point. So anyway, so let's go back to a couple other cross references we haven't gone through yet. I do want to go to Acts 20, verse 16. Just read this for you guys here. Acts 20:16. For Paul. For Shaul had decided to sail past Ephesus so that he might lose no time in Asia, for he was hurrying to be at Jerusalem, if possible, on the day of the Festival of Weeks. And then it has a footnote here. So you got Acts 21:12, Acts 21:4. So let's go to 21 verse 4 first. Acts chapter 21 verse 4. And having found taught ones, we remained there 7 days. And they told Shaul through the Spirit not to go up to Jerusalem. And then you got verse 12 of that same chapter. And when we heard this both, we and those from that place begged him not to go up to Jerusalem. So again, so now we got one last cross reference here in 1 Corinthians 16, verse 8. and I shall remain at Ephesus until the Feast of Weeks. So Paul, mind you, in a new covenant context, still understands he has to go to the temple to fully keep the feast. And just to add to Sister Marissa's question, I think what really gets confusing is like, well, we can't keep all of it, so we should keep none of it. No, Yahuwah says, even back in the original Passover, mind you, when the original Passover didn't have sacrifices for that night. The sacrifices for Passover didn't come about until like later on in Deuteronomy. Like you didn't have the ox and the sheep being sacrificed on that night until Deuteronomy 16 came around. Okay, so there is, and Yahuwah even said about his feast, they are memorials. So regardless whether we can keep them fully or not, we should at least memorialize them, I truly believe. And like I said before, just because we can't fully keep the feast doesn't mean we're in sin, okay? And I know that's like the biggest misconception when we first come into this walk. We got to be able to physically do everything or we're in sin. No, Yahuwah knows, he foreknew that we were going to be in a heavenly Melchizedek priesthood. He foreknew this was going to happen. He knew that we weren't going to be able to do these sacrifices and certain things and offerings. And that the majority of us wasn't going to be farmers, you know. He foresaw that. And again, even the farming commands, I'm pretty convinced that they're I know we can agree to disagree on this, but me personally, as far as the house I'm a part of, I'm not doing any of those farming things until we're back in the land, because I'm very convinced that it's exclusive to the land of Israel, all those farming commands. Exclusive. He kept saying, when you get into the land, the land, the land. He never said when you're in captivity. And I think what gets confusing is like when we look at the book of Daniel, he says, go ahead and grow vineyards. But Yahuwah never said in the context of his Torah, he never said, oh, you can go ahead and do that in whatever land you're in. So just to reiterate, I do, and like I said, I could be wrong, but I see certain commands, not all the 600 and something commands. Certain commands are exclusive to the land of Israel. If we're not there, we can't do them. And it's not sin to us that we can't do them. It's called, obeying him the way he wants to be obeyed. We can't just obey him any way we want. That to me, that's where the danger comes in, is that we think we can improvise. Yahuwah never gives that allowance in his word to improvise and say, well, I know you're in a situation where you can't keep this commandment at all. Well, it's okay if you improvise. He never ever says that. So anyway, that's all I wanted to end with. But go ahead, Brother Joshua. I see you might have a comment or question.
Yeah, no, I agree with you. When it was spoken, when they were in Babylon to grow vineyards, that command was specifically given to them and to them alone. That wasn't given the way it's worded and the way in the context. It's not a general command like every single time you go into captivity, you have to start planting vineyards. That was spoken, read it for yourself, but that was spoken directly to them. If you read it in context and you read it the way it's worded, it's not a general command, only to them.
Yep. Yep. All right. Well, I think that's it for I did actually know, you know what? I wanted to end on a very powerful note here about the spiritual meaning of this feast. What it really reminds me of is Yahusha's our wave offering, right? When they did that wave offering on first fruits, right? Yahusha is, regardless, like I know there's arguments whether he was physically resurrected on that day or not. That's besides the point. Spiritually speaking, he is our first fruits. He's the first of the first fruits, as Paul says. So when I think about the counting to Shabuot, you can't help but think of the victory of Yahusha's resurrection, ascension, going back to the Father in heaven, and becoming that spiritual fulfillment of the wave offering that was done on the 15th of Abib. So I really, that honestly, I think that alone makes this festival so special. And I just want to reiterate, like, and again, if if we find out later on that there's confirmed by historical evidence that the Torah was given on this day, that's an added boost, great. But the reason I didn't want to teach that is because I have no idea. I don't want to be dishonest with any of our brothers and sisters and, fellow viewers and listeners out there. You can look it up for yourself, but Judaism today even admits they have no proof for believing that the Torah was given on Mount Sinai on a Shabuot. They have no proof whatsoever. It's a Mishnah tradition, Jewish traditional history. They have no idea whether it really happened or not on that day. So that's why I want to refrain from teaching it that it happened on that day. And I know there's a lot of other people that have made that same mistake in the past. I don't want to do that because I don't want to mislead anyone. Personally, I don't think we need it to be added, reason to celebrate the feast, whether or not the Torah was given on this day. There's so many other things, the outpouring of the Ruach, Yahusha being the wave offering. There's so many other things we know for a fact happened on this day. And that even spiritual implications, whether it happened on this day or not, are important. The fact that Yahusha is the first of the first fruits is extremely important in my opinion. So hopefully you guys got something out of this today. I pray this was a baraka for everyone viewing and listening. And again, so if you guys have any questions, those viewers and listeners out there, anything confused you about this study, please feel free to reach out. Reach out to the YouTube channel, Awakened by Yahuwah Assembly. And I think my brother Joshua, he could also refer you to me. He's on YouTube, I think now as I think Yahusha. I think that's my brother Joshua's name on there. So I'll start giving you guys links to our channels and stuff like that. Even though you guys should be seeing this on YouTube anyway, but anyway, so I'll start giving you guys links about this and have a great rest of your Shabbat, of your high Shabbat and festival of Shabuot, all of our brothers and sisters. Shalom.